This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning everyone. Rucham Avam. Shalom Aleichem to the Kol Agad Perka of Kew Garden Hills, New York. Thank you everyone for joining this morning. We have a fantastic Shiur for Parshas Vayeshev and Chanukah, Haba Aleinu L'Toiva. So I want to welcome everybody on the Zoom as well as on the telephone. And I thank Rabbi Moskowitz, who was kind enough to post on the chat section of the Zoom. There are two new Sfarim that are available. One for Art Scroll on Chanukah, and the other one on the Holy Tana Rav Meir Bal HaNes. And they're available for order. The Hebrew Sefer has free delivery. And Rabbi Moskowitz was kind enough to post the link to the new website, rabbidg.com, where you could get all the information about the Sfarim and upcoming events. And I want to remind everyone the Shiurim are available on TorahAnytime.com and are now available on podcast. Okay, so with that
excuse me, for those people who are on the call, I will be sending you an email with the link since you don't see the chat from Zoom.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rabbi Moskowitz. Shkayach. Okay. So let's begin. Very often, Parshas Vayeshev is the parsha which is read immediately preceding the Yom Tov of Chanukah, and this year, the way the calendar comes out, Parshas Vayeshev is the parsha that we read on the Yom Tov of Chanukah. So certainly, Parshas Vayeshev will tell us a lot about the Yom Tov of Chanukah, as it's the introduction, as well as this year, the Parsha of Shabbos Chanukah. So let's begin with a very interesting question that has been discussed by many authorities, namely, why is there no Masechta dedicated to the Yom Tov of Chanukah? Chanukah is one of the longest Yom Tovim of the year, if not the longest. I mean, it rivals Sukkot in Eretz Yisrael. It is as long as the longest Yom Tov of the year. And Purim, which is only one day, has 30 blot in Masechta Megillah. So naturally, we would expect that there would be a Masechta Chanukah, at least 240 blot. And lo and behold, Masechta Chanukah does not have 240 blot, because Masechta Chanukah does not exist. Why, in fact, is there no Masechta in Chanukah? All you have is a few blot in Gemara. You have halachos in the Rishonim, codified in the Shulchan Aruch, but it's not mentioned in the as a Masechta. Now, there are 6 references to Chanukah in the Mishnah. I remember when I was in 7th grade, the Rabbi would give special credit questions, and one of the questions was, where is Chanukah mentioned in the Mishnah? So we have here from the Sefer Kamoitzei Shelah. One mention is Bikurim. It says from Sukkot until Chanukah you bring Bikurim and you're koirei the parsha of Bikurim. By the way, part of the mitzvah of Mikra Bikurim is we say the pasuk, Arei mimcha Hashem kidi lisani v'lo yisimachta oivayli. That is one of the reasons why Mizmar Shir Chanukah Vayso David is the Mizmar of Chanukah, because in the Mishnah we bring Bikurim and we say the parasha of Mikra Bikurim until Chanukah. Then we have, regarding Kiddush HaChodesh, during different months of the year, we send out messengers, and during the month of Kislev, we send out messengers because of Chanukah. Regarding Tainus Tzibur, in Masechta Tainus, we do not decree a fast on the Tzibur on Chanukah. Regarding reading the Maftir in Masechta Megillah, Parak Gimel Mishnah Daled, we interrupt the regular scheduled reading of the Haftarah on various days, including Chanukah. Regarding Avelos, we suspend Avelos on Rosh Chodesh and on Chanukah. And to a certain extent, there are certain practices of Avelos that are interrupted. And regarding damages, it says if the storekeeper put his menorah outside, Rabbi Huda is of the opinion you would be pater. But the question is, Rabbi Isai, why is there no Masechta dedicated for Chanukah? And it's reported in the name of the Gra, says his son in his Hakdama to Medrash Agadas Bereshis, that he says he heard from his father that besides the 7 Masechta Ketanois, there were other small Masechtas, Masechta Tfilin, Masechta Mezuzah, Masechta Chanukah. Also in the Hakdama of the Rav Pa'alim, he writes similarly that there was a small Masechta Chanukah. But be it as it may, we definitely don't have a regular Masechta Chanukah, certainly not a Masechta that's extant, and that sort of begs the question, why in fact is there no full-fledged Masechta for the Yom Tif of Chanukah? And that brings us, Rabbi side, to an amazing analysis by none other than the Shelah Hakadosh, Rav Yeshaya ben Avram Halevi Horowitz, who lived from 1560 to 1630. He was born in Prague, and he was nifter in Tveria on the 11th day of Nisan. His grandfather was Reb Sheftel. His father was Reb Avram Horowitz, a student of the Ramah. His father wrote the Sefer Emek Bracha and Yesh Neuchlin. He was a Rav in Prague, together with the Kli Yakar. And in 1619, he became his successor. He was a great Paisek. He was a great Mekubal. And he yearned for Israel. The Shelah yearned for Eretz Yisrael, and when his wife died in the year 1620, he seriously thought about moving to Eretz Yisrael. And in 1621, without telling his family, only telling one or two of his confidants, he didn't even tell his children, he decided to go off to Eretz Yisrael. And as a consolation, he wrote an ethical will that he would not complete in Prague. He completed it after being in Israel a number of years. And the Shelah Hakadosh begins to journey through Germany, through Italy, through Syria. He's coming down through the north of Israel. He's offered to be the rabbi in Sfas, but he became the Rav in Yerushalayim, and with no salary, which is always a good thing for a rabbi to do if he's able to do it. But the Shelah was independently wealthy. He was a very wealthy man. In fact, at every meal of his, he would feed 70 Bachure Yeshiva at every single Suda. And when he comes to Eretz Yisrael, he became acquainted with the Kabbalistic teachings of Reb Chaim Vital, which were not known in Europe at the time. In 1625, life became intolerable in Yerushalayim, and on Shabbos morning, the 11th day of Elul, 15 Rabbanim were arrested, including the Shelah, and they were not released for 15 days. Now, we know the Shelah is buried right near the Rambam, and in 1621, upon entering Yerushalayim for the first time, he conceived of the idea of writing a siddur, which he called Shar HaShamayim, because he entered the gates of Jerusalem on Friday, Parshas Vayetze. And one of his motivations for publishing on the siddur is because a siddur would have the most extensive circulation. So the Shelah analyzes the story of Yosef HaTzadik, and the Shelah wants to know, he says, I want to be me'oirer, my listeners, my audience, on many great sfeikos that is worthy to be aroused and to think about regarding Yosef. First of all, says the Shelah, and I'm on number 2, he says, firstly, I have a general question. We know the greatness of the Shvatim. We know the Shvatim were very great. They were greater than the heavenly angels. The Shvatim are the secret of the 12 permutations of the Yud Kei Vav Kei. We know Hashem's name Yud Kei Vav Kei. There are 12 ways to mix it around, and they represent the 12 Shvatim. How is it possible that such great personalities should together prepare and plan and orchestrate the worst sin in the world, murder, and to kill Yosef HaTzadik, who's Yitzadik Yisod Olam? You want to say one time one great person made a big mistake, and out of hatred he decided to kill someone, but that they should all gather together and in unison come up with this decision to commit this atrocity. How is it possible? Not even the biggest Russia, who committed many sins, would murder another Jew. Meaning, among the Jewish people, even someone who commits the most grievous sin would never orchestrate planned, premeditative murder. And even furthermore, says the Shelah, we know that they wouldn't even. So first of all, these were great tzaddikim. How could they plan premeditative murder? How could they kill a tzaddik? Furthermore, he's their brother. He's their flesh and blood. We know in Bereshis Rabbah, it says that after the brothers came to appear before Yosef, Yosef could not restrain himself. And he called all the Egyptians out. He said, everybody leave the room, because Yosef did not want to shame his brothers. And the Medrash says Yosef did not act properly, because if in a private audience one of his brothers would have given him a kick, he would have died immediately. And then the other opinion says, no, Yosef did properly, because Yosef knew the righteousness of his brothers. He said, my brothers are not suspect to murder even a Mitzri. You hear what the Medrash is saying? Yosef didn't have to be scared of his brothers, because his brothers were not even suspect of killing a Mitzri. So how could the brothers be suspect of killing Tzaddik Yesod Olam? And here's the biggest question of the day. And that is, Chazal tell us that after Yosef revealed himself to his brothers, the Medrash says the brothers wanted to kill Yosef. Listen to this. We know that the brothers contemplated tshuva, and they regretted and repented for their sin, and they said, "Vayomeru eshelachiv, avol ashemim anachnu." They said, "We're guilty." The brothers acknowledged their guilt. But Chazal say in the Medrash, when Yosef revealed himself to the brothers said, this is Yosef, let's kill him. Wow, that was really sincere tshuva. They're suffering, they're being accused of being spies by the king of Egypt, and then they admit their guilt, but as soon as Yosef reveals himself, the Medrash says, they want to kill him. Well, wow, what a very sincere tshuva they must have done. Weren't they embarrassed? We know that in order to do tshuva, you have to be ashamed of your sin. What kind of shame for their sin did they feel if immediately when Yosef reveals himself, they immediately want to kill him? Another interesting question. We know that all the years that Yosef was in Egypt, Yaakov Avinu, who was a Navi, did not have access to this classified information that Yosef was sold down to Mitzrayim. Why? Because there's a concept, the brothers put God in cherem. God sat on the court case, and the brother said, if anyone dares tell Yaakov what we did, they're going to be excommunicated, and they joined the Shechina with them. Says the Shelah Sheni Kasha, Heim Shitfu Shechina Imam, they joined the Shechina with them. Ve'ich nishtatva Shechina Imam, how could the Shechina join with them? We know that Yaakov Avinu on his deathbed, he prayed, I don't want my name associated with Zimri. Besoidem al tavai nafshi, I don't want my name associated with that terrible sin of Zimri and Cosby. I don't want my name associated with the episode of Korach. So if Yaakov Avinu did not want his name associated with these grievous sins, namely Korach, namely the episode of Cosby and Zimri, then how could God allow his name to be associated with the sale of Yosef? Another interesting question. In the whole saga, which occupies basically 4 parashiyos, Vayeshev, Miketz, Vayigash, and Vayechi, the 2 main players were Yosef HaTzadik and Yehuda. Why Dafka these 2 brothers? Furthermore, we know in the beginning of this week's parsha, Eila Terledois Yaakov Yosef ben Shvasrei Shana Hayara Yasachav Batzain Vihunar Es B'nei Vilha Es B'nei Zilpa. Who's Yosef hang out with? B'nei Vilha or B'nei Zilpa. Why? Because he accused the brothers of calling the B'nei Bilha and B'nei Zilpa Shvachos, the sons of maidservants. So Yosef stuck up for them. Now, that means that Yosef had a very close relationship with the B'nai Bilha and the B'nai Zilpa. So I don't understand. I could understand why the B'nai Leah wanted to sell Yosef. But why would the B'nai Bilha and the B'nai Zilpa, who Yosef was very close with, Yosef saved them from embarrassment. Yosef stuck up for them. Yosef stuck out his neck for them. Why did they not respond in kind? And they were also in on the sale of Yosef. Why the B'nai Bilha and B'nai Zilpa as well? And furthermore, let's try to understand, why did Yosef have to have two dreams? What is the meaning of the two dreams? He had two different visions of grandeur. Comes the holy Shelah Hakadosh, and his presentation of the sale of Yosef is personally my favorite. And he says, in the Jewish people, we have three institutions of chashivos, of importance. Three kisarim, three crowns. Keser Kahuna, Keser Malchus, Keser Torah. We have the crown of priesthood, we have the crown of sovereignty, and we have the crown of Torah. Regarding Kahuna, Levi got it. When Levi was born, God sent the Malach Gabriel, and he accompanied him with 24 gifts, and he was called Levi. Keser Torah, Yosef got. Whatever Yaakov Avinu learned in the Yeshiva Shem Ve'ever, he gave over to Yosef. But Marav Rabbi say Keser Malchus, Yehuda was zoicha too. Now, I ask you, what is the concept of Malchus in the Jewish people? I thought we're all brothers, no? Hey bro, we're all achim, kulanu b'nei ish echad anachnu. We're all brothers. How could one brother have gavhus, have superiority over another? What is the concept of Malchus in Klal Yisrael? And the Shelah Hakadosh says, the concept of Malchus in Klal Yisrael is to solidify and be the mishakef, to project and to promote and to promulgate and to disseminate and to empower Malchus Shamayim. In fact, the concept is that Malchus in Klal Yisrael is a reflection of God's Malchus and gives stability to God's Malchus. As we know, that by the birth of all the Shvatim, it says, Vatahar Vateled. She conceived and she bore. She conceived and she bore. But by Yehuda, when Yehuda was born, it says, Vatah Moed Miledes. A lashon of Amida, stability. Because when Yehuda was born, that was Yehuda was the roots and the patriarch of the Davidic dynasty, and that is what gives Amida, stability, to God's throne. We know that every throne has to have 4 legs. What are the 4 legs of God's throne? The first is Abraham Avinu. The second is Isaac. The third is Jacob, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And the 4th leg of the throne of God is David. Says the holy Shelah. Look at the word Yehuda and you'll see wonders. Yehuda consists of the word Yud Kei Vav Kei, because Yehuda and Malchus Beis David projects God's sovereignty. And then the Dalid represents that Yehuda, David, is the 4th leg of the Kisei HaKavod. Malchus Beis David, Rabbi Sai, is the projector and gives stability to God's sovereignty. David HaMelech is the Regel Revi. By the way, when David's Malchus is elevated, then God will be sovereign over the world. That's why it says, Bayoim Ahu Yiyah Hashem Echad Ushmai Echad. Soifei Tevois, Echad Ushmai Echad is David. The word Yehuda is a wondrous word because you have the Shem Havaya plus the letter Daled. And therefore, Rabbi Isai, Anyone who starts up with Malchus Beis David is starting up with God, is starting up with the Shekhinah. Because Malchus Beis David is what gives stability to the Shekhinah. Malchus Beis David, that comes from Yehuda, Yud Kei Vav Kei plus the fourth letter, which gives stability to God's throne. Says the Holy Shelah, when Yosef HaTzadik had dreams, and he said that your bundles will bow down to me, and V'hinei hashemesh v'hayoreach v'achadasar koichavim mishtachavim li. So, v'hayomer echav. The brothers say to Yosef, we're going to bow down to you? Who do you think you are? Hamala'ich timla'ich aleinu imashal timshal banu. The brother said, Yehuda. The brother said like this, Yosef, you want Keser Torah? You could have Keser Torah. Our father taught you the Torah. Levi, you want Keser Kahuna? Keser Kahuna belongs to you. But Malchus belongs to Yehuda. How dare, Yosef, you have dreams of grandeur. You think you're the king? Sovereignty does not belong to you. Sovereignty belongs to Yehuda. And therefore they deemed Yosef's illusions of grandeur to be a moired b'malchus beis David. That was tantamount to rebellion against Davidic dynasty, which is tantamount to rebellion against God Almighty Himself, the sovereignty of the Malchus Shamayim. And therefore they were able to join God in their cherem, and God participated. Because when Bezdin down here deems somebody a rebel against the Davidic dynasty, that is how it is deemed in Shamayim. Marv Rabbi, this was not what Yosef had in mind. They mistakenly interpreted that Yosef's dreams of power were to usurp the Malchus Beis David. No. Says the Shelah, there is a concept that in order to be a melech, in order to be a sovereign and a king, you need to have a people, you need to have an am, you need to have a nation. Ein melech b'lo am. There's no king without a people. Says the Holy Shelah, in order for the people to be reckoned a people, you need a force, you need a power to consolidate and galvanize the people and unify and unite the people and bring them together and lay the foundation to create a nation, and then that force will step away and yield to the Malchus Beis David. That force, that phenomenon, that power of a spiritual energy which is needed to galvanize and unite the people is the midah of Yesod, foundation, which is the midah of Yosef HaTzadik. Without Yosef, we would still be Meshubin in Mitzrayim. Yosef's power was very prominent. Yosef had very great prowess. And God sent us the refuah before the Makkah. Yosef went down to Mitzrayim before the rest of the Jewish people. And therefore he was able to create a welcoming environment for the Jewish people when we came down. He instituted that everyone has to be circumcised. So the true king, says the Shelah, Melech Be'emes, is David Malkeinu. But without Meluchas Yosef, we never would have had Meluchas Yehuda, because we never would have been an Am. And this is the verdict of history. This is a stream in history which is observed quite often, even regarding the sanctity of the temple. Before the Beis Hamikdash, which was built by Shloimeh, we have Mishkan Shelah, which was in the Chelek of Yosef. And even though it was ultimately destroyed, Yosef opens the Tzinar. Yosef is the Shvil. He establishes the connections of Kedusha, and once we have that, once we have the Tzinar, which is called in Kabbalah the Yesod, the foundation, the midah of Yesod, once we have the foundation, we could build Malchus Beis David on top of the foundation of Yosef. And even though Yosef's Melucha dissipates, and even though Yosef's Mishkan dissipates, but It's kol ha'olam nizoin b'shvil chanina b'ni. Once the shvil is created, b'shvil chanina b'ni, through the medium, through the conduit, through the pathway. Yosef is the yesod. That is exactly what happened. Once the Jewish people left Mitzrayim, b'tseis Yisrael mi Mitzrayim, hoisa Yisrael mam shaloisav, hayam rav ayonos. As soon as we left Egypt, we became a people, and it was hoisa Yehuda lekadshai. And we're always led by Yehuda, the first degel to travel. Rishai Nachshon ben Aminadav jumps in first. But we always need Yosef to pave the way, to create the pathway of Kedusha. It's the same thing in Malchus. Who is the first king of Israel? Not David, Shaul, from Shevet Binyamin. But that's why he was called Shaul. It was borrowed Melucha. Melucha belongs to no one other than LeDavid ol Zaroi ad Olam. It belongs to David. Shaul could be Shoyel, the Melucha. But Melucha rests in the hands of Malchus Beis David, as the Pasuk says, La Yasur Shevet mi Yehuda, and as Abarbanel writes, Ad Hayoim, Malchus Beis David, Jewish leadership and sovereignty, and for the most part, most Gedolei Yisrael, have emanated from Malchus Beis David. Whether it was Rashi, whether it was the Rambam, the Maharal, the Shelah, or the Abarbanel himself. Now, Malchus belongs to David HaMelech and to Shevet Yehuda. And when Yosef began to have these dreams that the brothers are going to bow down to him, this was reckoned by his Achim to be a rebellion against Malchus Beis David, and thereby a rebellion against God himself. Now what's very interesting, the Shelah quotes the Gemara, Kol hachoylek al Malchus Beis David kachoylek al Ashchina. Now, while this is certainly logical and reasonable, as Malchus Beis David is the meshakef, it is the reflection and the projection of the Malchus Shamayim, and gives stability to the Malchus Shamayim, the Gemara in Sanhedrin does not quite say that anyone who argues on Malchus Beis David is like arguing on the Shechina. I'm going to show you in a moment what the Gemara does say. But this, says the Shelah, is why the Bnei Bilhah and Bnei Zilpah agreed to participate in the sale of Yosef. They loved Yosef dearly. They were touched and honored and humbled that Yosef stuck up for them. They had no personal gripes against Yosef, but they halachically agreed with their brothers that Yosef's dreams of grandeur were an infringement and an attack and a challenge on the principle that Judaism rests on, and that is, there is a family from David through which God's sovereignty is recognized. And they too agreed that while they loved Yosef on a personal level, halachically they paskined objectively that Yosef is a marid b'malchus. I want to suggest, b'siyata d'shmaya, a very interesting chidush, that is the reason why the brothers threw Yosef into a pit of snakes and scorpions. Because the Gemara says in Sanhedrin on Daf Kuf Yud, Amar Rabbi Yosi, Hachoylek al Malchus Beis David Roy Lakishay Nachash. Someone who's arguing, someone who disputes, challenges the Malchus Beis David should be bitten by a snake. It says over here, Vayizbach Adoniyot Tzoinu Bachar Umri Im Eben Azechel Zivasam Im Chamaz Zoichel Yafar. So I want to say like this. Since the correct and worthy punishment of someone who challenges Malchus Beis David is they should be bitten by a snake, the brothers paskin as follows. To them it seemed like that Yosef in fact was challenging Malchus Beis David. But they can never be certain. So they said the telltale sign will be, we'll throw him in a pit with snakes and scorpions. If he is bit, that will be clear proof that in fact Yosef has challenged Malchus Beis David. But if the snakes leave him alone, that indicates that he does not deserve this punishment, and he is not truly being choylek al Malchus Beis David. Now, the Gemara does not say if you dispute Malchus Beis David, it's like arguing on the Shechina. It says if you argue on your Rebbe, it's like arguing on the Shechina. And it says anyone who fights with the Rebbe, it's like fighting with the Shechina. And it says someone who has complaints against the Rebbe is like having complaints against the Shechina. So the Shelah seems to be putting these two things together, that if arguing on Malchus Beis David you should be bitten by a snake, and arguing on your rabbi is like arguing on the Shechina, the Shelah seems to sort of join these two concepts together, that one who disputes the Malchus Beis David, it's like disputing the Shechina. Now, Marv Rabbi say, Yosef HaTzadik had no dreams of grandeur, of really, in fact, taking Malchus away from Yehuda. His sole ambition was to galvanize the people, consolidate the people, forge them into a nation at which lay the foundation, at which point Yehuda could come in and step into his role, his proper role of Malchus. Yosef's dream was only Yesod. I would like to suggest also the Siyata D'Shmaya, that when Yosef, so when the brothers, listen to this is unbelievable, says the Shelah. You know, after they sold Yosef and they were having difficulties, they said, must be we made a mistake. Yosef has no dreams of grandeur. He doesn't have ambitions of sovereignty, of rulership, of being a king. We made a mistake. We misjudged. We were misguided. And then they come down to Egypt, and they're dealing with a world superpower. Someone who's holding hostage their brother. Someone who's running the world economy. Someone who is a bona fide melech in every sense of the word. And now the brothers hear that this melech ha'olam is saying, Ani Yosef. And then the brother said, we were wrong in thinking we were misguided. Our suspicions have been confirmed. He does have dreams of grandeur. He does want to be the melech. He is usurping Malchus Beis David. Let's kill him now. They felt halachically compelled to act upon their initial psak that Yosef's a morid b'malchus. So what does Yosef tell them? Yosef says, Ki lemichya shalachani aleichem. You're mistaken again. I have no dreams of grandeur. I don't want to be Melech Yisrael. I merely want to lay the foundation. I want to establish the Jewish people as an Am, and then Yehuda, you could step forward and be the Melech. But I would like to suggest, how does Yosef, how does he convince his brothers that in fact he doesn't want to be Melech, but he merely wants to be Yesod? The Chazal tell us, Yosef told his brothers, step forward, and Yosef shows the brothers he has Milah. We know the Milah represents the Midah of Yesod. Maybe that was the message of Yosef. Yesod, that's all I want to do. I just want to lay the foundation. I want to lay the groundwork upon which to build the Jewish people, and then Yehuda could step forward. This is what Yosef did in terms of Malchus. First came Shaul and then David. This is what Yosef did in terms of the Mikdash. First came Mishkan Shelah, and then came the Mikdash of Shloimeh. And then the Shelah Hakadosh says that this is what will take place in the end of days. Because, says the Shelah, there was a time where Yosef perhaps... there was a time in history, where there were people who overstepped their rights and did infringe upon the Malchus Beis David. And that is in the times of Chanukah. As we know, the Chashmonaim, the Ramban tells us, were Chasidei Elyon, were the most supremely high, pious individuals. The Ramban in Parshas Vayechi says on the pasuk, Lo Yasur Shevet Mi Yehuda. Says the Ramban, in my opinion, the kings that reigned over the Jewish people from other Shvatim after David, they violated the will of their father. And they were relying on the prophecy of Achia Shiloni, who anointed Yeravam, and he said, I will afflict the descendants of David. However, says the Ramban, when the Jewish people prolonged appointing kings from a different Shevet, and not restoring it to Malchus Yehuda, they violated the command, the will of Yaakov Avinu. And the fact that they held on to Malchus, even though they were from other Shvatim, and they did not return it to Yehuda, they violated the will of Yaakov Avinu. And says the Ramban, this is why the Chashmonaim were punished. The Chashmonaim ruled during the second Beis HaMikdash. Says the Ramban, they were Chasidei Elyon. And if not for them, we wouldn't be here today and we would not have Torah today. But nevertheless, they were punished severely. As we know, the 4 sons of the Chashmonaim, who ruled one after another, despite their strength and success, they were all wiped out. Until the Gemara says in Masechta Bava Basra that Hordis was the slave of the house of the Chashmonaim. He wanted to marry a certain girl from the house of the Chashmonaim. He heard a heavenly voice. I'm in number 10 in Bava Basra, Daf Gimel Amud Beis, that cried out, any slave that rebels now will be successful. He got up and he killed out all of his masters. And he left one girl. He wanted to live with this one girl. She went up to the roof and she cried out. And she said, anyone who claims they're from the house of the Chashmonaim is a slave, because I'm the last remaining Chashmonai, and I'm going to jump off the roof. And she killed herself. The Gemara says he preserved her for 7 years in honey to satisfy his lust. Says the Ramban, the Chashmonaim were obliterated. They were wiped out to the man. Why were they wiped out? Because Yaakov Avinu said, kings shall always remain in the household of David from Shevet Yehuda. And anyone, whether it's the Chashmonaim, or whether it's the brother, whether it's Yosef, who tampers with it, is tampering with fire. Kol ha'choylech al malchus beis David, k'choylech al hashchina. Now I will share with you, the Ran and the Abarbanel disagree with the Ramban. And they learn that the Chashmonaim did nothing wrong by being melech, by being king. And they learn La Yasser Shevim Yehuda means that Torah leadership always rests in the hands of Yehuda. And that which the Gemara in Bava Basra says they were all wiped out, it's not so. You have to know how to read the Gemara, says Reb Tzadok HaKohen. They tried to wipe out all the Chashmonaim. They were in hiding, and many of them survived. What this girl meant was anyone who publicly claims they're from the Chashmonaim is lying, because I'm the last publicly known Chashmonai, and I'm jumping off a roof. But there were survivors of the Chashmonaim, says Tzadok HaKohen. But the Ramban is of the opinion that the reason why, in fact, the Chashmonaim were wiped out, in the Ramban's opinion, is because they violated the command of Yaakov Avinu, La Yasur Shevet Mi Yehuda. Now, what the brothers thought Yosef was doing to Yehuda, the Ramban says the Chashmonaim did do. And the punishment that the Chashmonaim got, the brothers wanted to inflict on Yosef. And we suggested that is the reason why they tested Yosef by throwing him to the snakes, because Kol ha'choylek al malchus beis David roi lahakishay nachash is worthy to be bitten by the snakes. And the fact that Yosef wasn't bitten, that indicates that in fact Yosef did not have dreams of grandeur, but he was merely laying the foundation, and that's why Yosef shows his brother the Milah. Now, says the Ramban, the Shelah Hakadosh. And in the parashiyos of Vayigash and Vayechi, it says repeatedly, Shelachani Elokim lefnechem. But it says that Yosef says, Vayishalcheni Elokim lefnechem, God sent me, Lasam lachem she'eris, to give you a remnant, ulahachayos lachem, and to bring you alive, lefleita gedola, a great salvation. So the Shelah asks, the pasuk seems to contradict itself. First it talks about she'eris, which seems to be a humble amount, a remnant, and then it says lefleita gedola, which is a lot. And the Shelah says this refers to the two messenger ships, the two stewardships that Yosef is historically sent on. One was when we left Egypt. Yosef forged us to be a people, and then Yehuda took the lead and became sovereign. And that was, so to speak, a she'eris. That was a small job. But here's the big job. And perhaps through this job, the Chashmonaim will ultimately have tikkun. Because the Shelah Hakadosh says that in the times of Chanukah, the Chashmonaim were punished because they took Malchus. But this will not be rectified until ultimately, before David HaMelech stands up to rule over the Jewish people, there will be a Mashiach ben Yosef. And Mashiach ben Yosef will clear the path. And he will be murdered al Kiddush Shemai for the sake of Israel. And then David will stand up and they're going to try to kill him. But they will not be successful. So Yosef says, now I am paving the way, the she'eris, for the Malchus Beis David. But la'asid lavai, I will pave the way in a very significant way. Marv Rabbi said, according to this approach, to me this answers the most basic question on this week's Parsha, which maybe we'll speak about more on Wednesday. And that is, Rabbi Sai, this week's Parsha is so smooth until it gets so choppy. What do I mean by that? Parshas Vayeshev is nearly entirely about the sale of Yosef. And then, when it talks about the brothers threw him in the pit, and then there was a caravan of Ishmaelites, and they sold them to the Yishmaelim, and when we get up to Ravi, V'hamidanim acharu Yisrael Mitzrayim levoitifar seris paroi sar hatabachim. And then we go to Chamishi, V'Yosef Rad Mitzrayim v'yiknehu. The problem is, from Ravi to Chamishi is the longest commercial you ever saw. It interrupts the regular flow of the parsha to tell you a little story. By the way, Yehuda went down, and he met a guy, an Ish Adulami named Chira, and Yehuda saw a woman, Shua, and he married her, and he had 2 kids, Aaron Oinan, and Aaron Oinan got married, and they died, and they had a third, there was a third brother named Shelah. Er's wife was Tamar, and Oinan wanted to be Miyabim Tamar, but he didn't live with her. And now Tamar is a double Yavama. By the way, the Rashi Tevos of the opening words of this week's Parsha, Vayeshev Yaakov Bi'aretz Megure, is Rashi Tevos Yibum, because this week's Parsha discusses Yibum. And it's the whole story that Yehuda has his daughter-in-law, Tamar, and nobody wants to be Miyabim her, so she poses as a Zoina, and he lives with her, and she's about to be killed, and Yehuda admits, oh, Yosef, back to Mitzrayim! Rabbi said, what in the world is this episode of Yehuda and Tamar doing randomly smack in the middle of Yosef's descent to Egypt? The story just got going. What is this, like, lahavdil, you want to keep people's attention, so you go from one episode, you shoot on another place, and then you come back to the first one, and what's going on over here? Stick to the storyline. But says the Shelah Hakadosh, this is the storyline. The whole reason Yosef is going down to Mitzrayim is to create the foundation for the Jewish people, prepare the Yesod of Klal Yisrael, be able to unify the nation, in order for Malchus Beis David to stand up and maintain Malchus Yisrael, Malchus Beis David. So once Yosef's on the way to Egypt, God says that's all a hachanon, a preparation for the Malchus Beis David, which comes about through the episode of Yehuda and Tamar. So Yehuda and Tamar is not a digression, but it is the objective of why Yosef is being sent down to Mitzrayim, to lay the groundwork for the ultimate sovereignty of Malchus Beis David. The Chassam Sofer is quoted as saying in the Tamei HaMinhagim that the reason why Chanukah is not mentioned in the Mishnah is because who redacted the Mishnah? Rabbi. Rabbi says in Shas, Ana mi Beis David Ka'asina, I come from the Davidic house. And since he redacted the Mishnah with a heavenly spirit, in deference to his holy ancestors, Malchus Beis David, although the Chashmonaim were great tzaddikim and pious individuals, but because they usurped the Malchus Beis David, in order to preserve and stand up for their honor, Rabbi did not designate a Masechta for them. And this is brought by Reb Shimon Sofer in the Chud HaMeshulash. Many question this, that as if Rabbi was intentionally trying to take some type of revenge against the Chashmonaim, but of course this is not the meaning, but rather through the heavenly spirit, Rabbi Yehuda Anasi was, as a scion of the Davidic dynasty, he was directed min hashamayim to limit, so to speak, their honor and their kayach by omitting them from the Mishnah. But as we mentioned, ultimately they will have their tikkun, because before the coming of Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben Yosef will, so to speak, be Moiser Nefesh, and selflessly lay the foundation for the Jewish people, and lay the Yesod, which is the Midah of Yosef, from which ultimately Malchus Beis David can flourish and take root. So on this Yom Tif of Chanukah, which is interestingly, on the one hand, the Chashmonaim, they had some failing according to the Ramban, but Rabbeinu Bechaya tells us Chanukah is from a language of Chanukah, inauguration, because it inaugurates the future Beis HaMikdash, the third Beis HaMikdash. So on the one hand, maybe the Chashmonaim went too far, but on the other hand, in inaugurating the third Beis HaMikdash, in that sense, perhaps they set the groundwork for the ultimate restoration of the Malchus Beis David that we should be zocheh to see b'mhera v'yameinu amen. Okay, shkoyach everyone. Thanks everyone for listening. Everyone's invited this afternoon at 5:30 to the Igaras Hagra. Thanks everyone. My Rabbi say have a great day.
Rabbi, can I ask you something?
Sure. Yes.
Rabbi, so we said early on that Yaakov gave over his Torah, his limudim to Yosef, not to the other brothers. So how were the other brothers qualified to make all of these halachic decisions about who's Moriv Malchus, not Moriv Malchus? Should they kill him? Should they not kill him? Where did they have the background to be able to make those kinds of decisions if they didn't have the Torah that Yosef had? As a matter of fact, you could argue that if Yosef had the Torah from Yaakov, that what he was doing was more based in halacha than what the brothers were doing.
Right. Good question. So, certainly Yaakov taught Torah to all the brothers, but Yosef had the Keser Torah. That means he was the preeminent sage. And when it comes to halacha, Holchem Achar Haroiv, despite, yeah.
Well, I'm not going to go there. All right.
Okay, call to everyone. Thanks.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.